Welcome back to my series on opening theory. In this video, I'm going to be talking about another line in Alekhine's defense. Now, this particular line is not very good for white, but it is one that black should still know about. But black doesn't necessarily need to go too in-depth with it. So, the game that I found is one from 1998. This is not a very good line for white, so as a result, you'll generally not see it played that often by strong players. But for this particular game, with the white pieces, we have Grandmaster Bojan Vuckovic, who at the time I don't think was a Grandmaster. His rating was about 2350. So he might not have even been an IM, he might have just been an FM at the time. He is a Serbian Grandmaster, and he's not just a Grandmaster in chess, but he is also a Grandmaster in problem solving. And with the black pieces, we have IM Boris Golubovic, who actually had a very good tournament at this event. And I think he finished tied for first, if not first itself. And he is an IM from Croatia, and he has also been involved as the tournament director of a number of World Senior Chess Championships. So I have added links about the players as well as the tournament, the Nova Gorica Open. Nova Gorica, of course, being a settlement in West Slovenia. I added links about information with all of them in the description, so if you're interested, feel free to check it out. And now onto the game. So, the game was Alekhine's defense. That is how the opening began. And then white decided to play the Krejkcik Gambit. So that line starts with the move Bc4, and already we see that the engine does not like this idea, but it'll give the players a break. They were playing at a time when engines were not so prevalent. And now here, in this position, the best thing for black to do is to just accept the seemingly free pawn on e4. Although we will soon see that it is not really a free pawn. So in this line, if white does not play their next move, then black is just a pawn up, and black has a fairly easy game, since not only is black a pawn up, but it's a center pawn that black would have won. So white played bishop takes, f7 check. There is only one legal move for black, and that is to take. And then white played the move queen h5 check. And now here, there are actually two playable moves for black. There are two popular choices. The most popular choice is the move that we saw in the game, which is king g8. However, the move g6 is also perfectly playable. This is fine as well. Like, the game could have continued if black chose to play g6 like this, and then just play the bishop to g7. And then after knight f3, just develop the rook, and then just move the king to g8, and then black is totally fine. Like this is perfectly playable for black. There isn't really anything wrong with g6. And back in this position, the move that happened in the game is king g8. However, it's worth talking about a move that is not playable, like especially for anyone in the audience who is might be a beginner or might not be that familiar with chess. And the move that is not playable is, of course, king e6. Like, this is... Like, the idea of this move would be to try to save the knight, but this is just terrible. Like, if you're a strong player, you kind of like, well, duh. Like, you shouldn't be putting your king in the center of the board, but let's just show what could happen. So, queen g4 check. Like, white could insist, hey, I want that knight, and maybe black's like, no, I want to keep the knight, and white's like, no, give me the knight. and black could be like, oh, well, I'm going to retreat my knight and attack your queen. And then white could be like, no, well, I'm going to attack your king. And then the king would be like, I'm running. And then the knight could go, yum, yum, yum. And then like the king could go like there, and then the queen could come here, and then the king could go like there, and then the bishop could come out. Sorry about that. And then like something like this, and then yum yum yum, and then run over here, and then this, and then that, and then bang. You know, like this is terrible. Like I'm of course playing these moves very quickly, but this is of course one possible thing that could happen if black tries to save the knight. Like, this is ridiculous. This is very silly. Do not try this, especially against a strong player. If you try to save the knight, your king will just die in the middle of the board. Something like this, you know, something like that. And there are, of course, no games between strong players, like master level players, that feature that because they kind of know better. Like strong players are scared of playing the fried liver with black, even though according to the engine, black can hold if black plays perfectly. But anyway, all the way back in this position, so we've looked at g6 a bit, which is a fine move. Like, g6 is playable, but it's not the most popular. And we looked at king e6 a little bit just to talk about why that move is really bad. And of course, king f6 is kind of a similar reason why it's bad. Like, basically, don't develop your king. Don't be playing classical bomb cloud style where you move your king in the center of the board. That will just result in checkmate. Anyway, in the actual game, black played the most popular move, which is king g8. I'm actually not fully sure why this move is more popular than g6. My guess is because g6 weakens the kingside pawn structure a little bit. Like, it's already fairly weak because you've lost the f-pawn. And anyway, this position here white plays queen d5 check, you know, similar to in the g6 line. Basically, white's going to win back the sacrificed minor piece. There is no real way to stop that, and no, king e6 does not count. Anyway, e6 is the only move, and then after queen takes e4, the other main difference between king g8 and g6 is that now d5 kind of comes with tempo. Like, you're not creating too many weaknesses is by playing d5, whereas if the pawn is also on g6, then, you know, the dark squares on this diagonal might get a bit weakened by going e6, d5. But anyway, now in this position, white played the most popular move, at least from humans, which is queen e2, and apparently the engine really doesn't like this. Apparently the engine much prefers queen e3, and I don't really understand why. I don't really get the main differences between the two. Ooh, it's a bit strange. I guess maybe the engine wants to keep the e2 square open for the knight on the king side. But basically, if the opponent plays queen e3, then basically the best line for black is actually just very similar to what happened in the game, which is to just play c5, and then c5 controls d4 square. Black has very strong grip on the center, so white might play f4 to take some central space, to take the e5 square, and then black might play knight c6, developing a piece, adding more control to the center, knight f3, bishop d6, and then there's this one creative idea, which is to develop this h-rook this way. Because way back in this position, over here, the main problem that black has in this line, that black needs to deal with, is this rook. Like, otherwise, black is doing great. Like, this line is not good for white, because what is happening in this position is that white has traded a center pawn for a flank pawn, and white Not only that, but white has given black some tempos with black's own center pawns. So basically black's putting pawns in the center, and black's development is pretty nice as well. Like basically black only has one problem in this whole line, and that is the rook on h8. Black needs to get that rook out of there. Otherwise, it's kind of like black's king has already castled in a way. Like even though black has moved their king around, the king is actually fairly safe. It's kind of hard for white to get at, so it's not really weak. Like, yes, moving your king in the opening is generally bad, but if your opponent can't get at it, then it's not so bad. Like black has very adequate compensation for the having to move the king around. So anyway, in this position here, what happened in the game was white played the move queen e2. And here, what the engine really wants black to do is play knight c6, and then after a move like d3, play the move e5, and then have a central structure like this. And I think this is fine. Like, I think this is reasonable and that not that hard to remember. But it's kind of weird that against queen e2, the engine's like, yeah, play this way, but against queen e3, it's like, no, play the other way. So since I don't like having to remember weird, subtle details, especially ones I don't really understand, I'm kind of fine with just, if the opponent goes queen e2, to just, as in the game, just play c5. And of course, part of the idea of c5 is to just, take some central space, control the d4 square, and just then play the knight to c6. So anyway, even though the engine considers this a mistake, it's actually kind of hard to see why the other approach, like why the knight c6 e5 approach is significantly better. Like, it's hard to see right away. Like, maybe if you're a grandmaster, or maybe if you're a computer, you can see why. But what black did here is actually perfectly fine. Like, black's got a fine position out of the opening already. Black isn't really throwing away like a missed win or anything. So anyway, in the game, white played f4 because white has very little control of the center. White would like to take some central space. And also, white might want to try to attack black's king on the king side somehow, even though it's kind of hard to do that. So then black played bishop d6, a reasonable move, just developing a piece. He's maybe clearing the way for the h rook once the king gets out of the way. White played d3, and then here, instead of going h5, rook h6, which is what we saw from the engine in the other line, black went for an approach that is, a bit more human and also a decent idea, which is to play h6. And then after white developed their knight with knight f3, black played king h7, and essentially black has solved the problem that they have in this line, which is the rook. After white castled kingside, black played rook f8, and now black has no problems. Like, black's kingside pawn structure might be a little weak, but black's control of the center is very nice. Like, black is already doing very well. The engine gives the edge to black. So here, white played the move knight e5, which is reasonable. That's a good square for the knight. That's a good place for it to go to. Maybe it can target this weakness, for example. Stuff like that. And then black's like, I do not like that knight being there, and played knight d7. And this move is good. However, another move that the engine seems to prefer better is the move bishop takes e5, as that knight was white's best piece. But not only that, but after this trade, black is going to gain a bit of tempo and develop a bit faster. So that's probably why the engine likes this. Like, after queen takes, we have knight c6, and then black will just develop their pieces very quick. And if f takes, then black is very happy to just trade rooks over here. And then if queen takes, we again gain some tempo by developing the knight and attacking that pawn on e5. And then if white tries to maybe counterattack the pawn on c5, black will be like, nope, I'm going to counterattack the pawn on b2. Ooh, and maybe not even, like according to the engine, maybe not even take the pawn, maybe just develop and just get more pieces out and stuff. Anyway, this is not what happened in the game, but it does show one nice way of playing. Like basically black doesn't really have any real problems here. And it kind of looks like, oh, maybe white could bring their queen to f7, for example. Like maybe white could do this, but knight takes e5 would just hold everything together. Or so, oh, you know, it's kind of funny, although I'd be kind of tempted to just take the e5 pawn right away, but that's just me. But that's not what happened in the game. Instead, we have the move knight d7, which is a reasonable move. But the reason why this isn't as good as taking is because white might be able to build up some sort of attack on the king side. So according to the engine, what white should have done here is play the move knight g4. And then white could try to do some stuff on the king side. Like, it doesn't really work, but this is probably white's best practical chances. So after a move like b5 and then maybe knight d2 to try to get this knight into the game, bishop takes f4, knight f3, you know, attacking this bishop, and a trade is actually kind of good for white here, since black would have moved this bishop many times, and trading it for a bishop that has moved 0 times. So, you know, there would probably be like bishop c7, and then bishop d2, queen e7, and then just bring this rook in like this. Like, white would be down a pawn here, but at least white would have some nice piece activity, and white would be trying to do something. Like, be playing for something, like have some sort of plan, like some sort of idea as to what to do in this position. But instead, what happened was white played the move c3, which kind of gives up on any sort of plan, like kind of gives up on any try at really winning. Like, white seems to be more just trying to draw or something, which, you know, is not how I like to play chess. I like to go for the win, but I guess that's just me. Going for a draw with white, that's bizarre. Anyway, knight takes e5, f takes e5. Black is actually very happy to trade all this stuff off for multiple reasons. Like, one big reason being that black has the bishop pair, and the bishop pair can be very good in the endgame. So going closer to an endgame is good if you think you're going to be better over there. And also black does have very nice central control. And white's king is a little bit sus, and these pieces are also a bit suspicious, given that, you know, they haven't really left, although these pieces are kind of suspicious too. But anyway, in this position, white played king g1, black developed, you know, reasonable move, knight d2, we have queen e8. Queen e8 is actually a very clever, very creative idea, kind of turning one of black's weaknesses into strength, because one of black's weaknesses is this diagonal. It's kind of exposed. Those, like, these light squares are a bit weak at the moment. So how about we do something about that? How about we take this queen and we put it right here, where it will address all that stuff and maybe put some pressure on white's position. So here, white made a mistake, which is to play d4, and there are multiple reasons why this is a mistake. So after takes. So one reason why this is bad is because this creates a backward pawn, and that pawn is potentially weak. It's closer into black's territory, so black can get at it easier. Like, black's pawn on e6 is also a backward pawn, but white's bishop can't actually attack it. only white's knight can get at the pawn on e6, and also the pawn is fairly, like it's still within black's territory, so it's not doing too badly there. But another reason why this move was bad is because it opened up the c file, and as we can see, black can actually get to the c file much faster than white can. So black's going to make use of that. So not only do we have this weak pawn that's a potential target, but we also have this beautiful c file for our rook. So then in this position, black now played the move queen g6, getting the queen nice and active and dealing with some of the weaknesses on black's side. For as another example, it also protects this guy. Like this guy's a weakness, but now he's kind of overprotected, so that's kind of good. Kind of frees up the pieces a bit. And then here, white played the move knight f1, which is, you know, a bit passive. Like maybe part of the idea might have been to come over here to g3 or something. But and also to maybe get the bishop more active. And it's actually really funny what the engine says white should have played instead. According to the engine, white should have played knight b1, but that's a bit ridiculous. The reason for knight b1 actually becomes apparent if we look at another move like knight f3. So like after knight f3, we would have like rook c8, and then after a move like bishop d2, there's rook c2 hitting the b pawn. And then if b3, there's bishop b4, applying more pressure to the bishop on d2. And then if a3, there's bishop b5. We really want to kill that bishop on d2. And then if queen e3, there is this very nasty move, bishop c3. And it looks kind of like this hangs the bishop, but notice that this pawn over here, like black would be quite happy to play queen takes g2 checkmate with support from the rook. So that is why white cannot take this bishop on c3, and that is also why the engine would prefer for this knight to be on b1, where it could take the bishop, where it could just eat this guy. Alright, so anyway, like in this position here, according to the engine, the best move would be rook e1, and then there would be bishop d3, and this is just a very pleasant position for black. Like, black's pieces are all very active, they're all participating in the game, they're all supporting each other, whereas white's pieces are kind of poorly coordinated, they're a little bit funny. And let's see, is there anything else to say? No, not really. Like, I would be very happy to take black in this position, but this is not what had happened in the game. White did not play knight f3. White instead played the much more passive knight f1, probably just trying to hold everything together. Although I personally think knight f3 would have been better. But anyway, we have rook c8, and then queen d1, another passive move, getting the queen off of the second rank where it'll be hit by the rook, but still making a move by the queen anyway. We have bishop b5, just developing this bishop, like putting it on a much more active square where it's doing more. We have bishop e3, getting that bishop out, I like that. Rook c2, attacking the pawn on g2. The knight now comes to d2. We have queen d3, attacking the bishop, and just getting everybody involved. Remember that black has the two bishops, so generally speaking, like especially when there are pawns on both sides of the board, or like bishops are better than knights, and the two bishops in particular can be very monstrous. Like there are even times where two bishops can bully a rook, as we probably saw in that one game with Fromm's Gambit. Like they could be very nasty. So anyway, white played the move knight f1, and then black's like, yay, let's trade queens. And then white took back, and then black won a pawn. Like, black is quite happy to be playing this endgame. And white's like, would you like to trade rooks? And black's like, sure, but not yet. I will trade on my terms. I will decide when we trade the rooks. And then white's like, okay, I'll go rook f2. And then black's like, haha, your pieces are stuck. They cannot move. I will just make a little bit of progress here. And then white's like, okay, I'll play g3, maybe free my king a bit. And then black's like, I'm going to get my king active. And then white's like, well, I'm going to free up my pieces. And then black's like, no, your pieces are going to go back. Your king is going back to f1. Sorry. He is not coming out. And then white's like, aw. And then black's like, would you like to trade another piece? And white's like, oh no, I should not trade pieces. If I trade pieces, this is just a completely lost king and pawn endgame. Because black has won that pawn and has a much more active king. So we have bishop f2, and then king f5, and then we have king e2, and then king e4. And then in this position, white resigned. And the reason why white resigned is because this endgame was just completely lost. Black is going to win that pawn on d4. And the pawn on d5 is already just going to be a nuisance because, like, once the pawn on d4 is gone, it's just going to be a protected passed pawn, and that is just always going to be a thorn in white's king's side. Like, white's king basically, like, is always going to be distracted by that pawn because, like, it has to kind of stay in front of that pawn because otherwise it just walks up the board and promotes, and black's king can just go and take everything else and stuff. So, like, already, like, everything else being equal, this is just completely lost for white. Right? Like the way that I described isn't even the most optimal way of winning the game, but that's like one description of just how bad it is for whites in this position. So anyway, I hope that you enjoyed that game. I'm just going to review this stuff really quick. So the line that we looked at is in Alekhine's defense. It is the Krejkcik Gambit. What's funny is there's also a Krejkcik Gambit in the Dutch defense, but that's not what we're talking about today. So what black should do is just accept the gambits, because this line, it doesn't really have that many challenges for black to deal with. And then here in this position, there are two approaches black could take. Black could play g6, or black can go king g8. Both of those moves are fine. And in the game, we looked at king g8, and then this check takes, and then here, and then here. And then there are like two approaches to the center to look at. Like one approach is like this, just like that, and then develop like this. And then another approach, which I think is actually a bit more human and a bit more easier to remember, is to just go c5, and then after this, then do like this. And then there are two approaches we've seen for getting this rook out. Like this rook is the main problem for black in this line. One approach is to play h5 followed by rook h6, and another approach is to play h6, king h7, and then like rook f8 or rook e8 depending on the situation. And yeah, that will do it for today. That will do it for this game. As usual, if you liked what you saw, feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you, and until next time.